Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Mark Westcott here, and today I want to talk about the impossible meeting. What is the impossible meeting? Well, the impossible meeting is the one you have when it's just really, really hard to get people to come together. And most times, that's in regard to families. Mum and dad don't want to have the meeting, or the kids don't know how to have the conversation with mum and dad. Mum and dad don't know how to have a conversation with the kids. So how do you have the impossible meeting? What should you do when people in your family refuse to come together to talk about important succession, legacy, estate planning issues, and so on? And look, I talk about this stuff all the time. A lot of the time when I'm speaking, for example, to the young beef producers, I've spoken a number of times out at Roma in Queensland to the young beef producers, and we sort of get there and talk about how do you start the conversation with dad? How do you start the conversation with mum and dad? And we try and talk about tips and strategies and so on to open up the channels of communication. And it's a perpetual issue. The impossible meeting is a perpetual issue. I mean, I ran a webinar for one of the cattle groups recently, and one of the attendees contacted me afterwards and said, "Look, we've really got to get to work on starting up this conversation with mum and dad. I mean, there's four of us, four kids. All the kids are married, and all the kids have children. So there's grandchildren running around. There's four properties. There's lots of wealth, but mum and dad just won't sit down and have the conversation about what's going to happen. So each of these children are running a property, but they have no idea what the long-term plans for mum and dad are. So I said to her, just go to mum, go to dad. And she said, well, mum's in charge. And I said, well, just go say, hey, look, let's just have a conversation about this. And she is scared to death of talking to her mother because she knows that if it's not her mum's idea, her mother will still yell and scream at her for trying to bring up something which is not mum's idea. So, there's so many issues around relationships and so on. And we want to start talking about those today. I mean, I've got so many examples where this is an issue. I'm dealing with some clients in New South Wales at the moment, and something that really should have been done 15, 20 years ago. But it has got to the point now, this really is an impossible meeting, because it's got to the point now where the parents, the children are at each other's throats. The parents are not talking to the children. I mean, in one case, both dad and the non-farming brother walked past the farming brother's wife and just refused to acknowledge her, didn't say hello, just totally disregarded her. And these are the sorts of things where getting families together to have these conversations, and we've talked about conflict resolution, one of my earlier podcasts, but these are the sorts of issues that they're just happening all the time. And so I want to talk today about why people are afraid, why it's important, how should you start the conversation, what can go wrong, and what do great outcomes look like in regard to getting together all the people in the family. I mean, those of you that have seen some of my other podcasts will know the tea and scones story I tell, where the children, the middle generation, and the grandchildren got me out there to a meeting with them, and they put on tea and scones, and the grandparents lived like 150 metres away in a house on the property, and they invited them down. Now, they hadn't been able to get the grandparents to talk about this stuff for a year, ever. Like, every time it was brought up, it was like a taboo subject. But it was interesting. I was there. We all sat down. We had tea and scones, and by the time halfway through the first scone, we'd created consensus between all the family members. The grandparents said, "Yep, this is what we want to happen." They started talking about it. They opened up. So the point I'm trying to make is, once you can have the meeting, things tend to move forward. But it's getting the first meeting in place, which is really the hard part. So let's talk about why are people afraid to start this conversation. I suppose that's a good place to start here. And I'm going to start with a word that probably isn't used very much these days, but it's a word I remember from my youth, and and parents back in that vintage used to say it's just vulgar to talk about money. You know, it's bad manners. We shouldn't be having conversations about money. And so this has been inherited down through the generations, where grandparents didn't talk to the parents, and the parents now don't talk to the kids, because you don't have these. You just don't have these conversations about money. Things will just magically work themselves out. So just remember, some of this grief is coming from, it's an inherited, or it's a genetic issue, I think, where people start to just think that you shouldn't have that conversation. So the older generation, this is a difficult thing to talk about for them, because their parents didn't talk about it with them. For some people, it's scary to think about it. And, I know a lot of dads and mums out there, it's kind of like, I don't want to have the conversation because I don't know what the outcome's going to be. And what if it means that I have to leave the farm, or I have to give up work and let the next generation through? And because they don't know how to do it, they tend to do nothing. And getting back to the first point about being bad manners, you don't talk about money and so on. The hard part is the older generation don't know how to have the conversation with the younger generation, because they haven't got any experience in this sort of conversation. And the kids don't want to bring it up, because if the kids bring it up, they'll be seen as being money hungry and having entitlement and expectation issues and so on. So what we do, what we tend to do is nobody talks, and so nothing happens. Okay, as I said, sometimes it's scary to think about. This is why people are afraid to have a conversation. Maybe there's already negative family dynamics at play. As I said, I've got this family in New South Wales, but the on-farm brother, the off-farm brother just don't talk at all, and they resent each other, and there's jealousy there. The mother and the father are actually separated, but they don't talk to the next generation. Some of them, they talk to the off-farm child, but they, the grandkids don't see each other, and that's it. The real issues issues that come up is the cousins and so on end up hating each other because the parents do, because the grandparents won't start the conversation. So you can see why people are afraid, but also you're starting to hear from me what are some of the outcomes of that. Why are people afraid to have the conversation? I mean, I was chatting with someone the other day, this older couple, and their children and the grandchildren, and the older couple, they've got an estate worth about $60 million, just a little block of land, but in the right spot, $50–60 million worth of real estate. And they're afraid to have the conversation because, and I mentioned this before, because they don't know how to do it, and they want to do it themselves. It's kind of like, I'm going to be fine, leave it to me, I'll work it out, and I'll do it myself. They're looking for the cheap option, which is sort of ironic that they're worth so much money, but they're looking to save money. You can't save money on this, just like you can't save money on buying parachutes. I mean, this is, as I often say to people, if you had a brain tumor, you'd go to a specialist surgeon. You wouldn't just go to the local GP. And these people are afraid to do this. They've never done this before. You only tend to do estate and succession planning once, and then hopefully you'll keep it up to date. But if you haven't done it at this point in time, it's a scary proposition. And most people just don't know where to start. They don't know who to talk to, who to trust, who to avoid. But they can fix fences, they can fix the polypipe, they can fix the engines around the place, but they don't know how to do this. So dad's good at everything, but if they don't know how to do it, they just ignore it and avoid it and hope it goes away. And I think you'd understand with succession planning and estate planning, it's not going to go away. Okay, let's talk about point number 2. Why is this important? Okay, well, why it's important that you start the conversation is that because the longer you leave it, the worse it gets. It's like exponential. We call it the exponential grief curve. The sooner you get this started, the easier it is. As time goes on, it never gets better, it gets worse. It's like everything in life. The longer you put it off, the worse it is to actually get started. And, having good open conversation, if you can do that early, you're going to avoid the exponential grief curve. And I call it exponential because think of it like this. The son comes home, he gets married and so on, and his spouse is, or daughter comes home and gets married. Anyway, the spouse is having the conversation with the child that's come onto the property, and they're saying, well, what's happening? You're doing all this work. You've been here forever, and what's our future look like? Should we just be staying on the property, trusting what mum and dad are going to do, or do we have some security and certainty around, putting in this 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year? And eventually, that nagging can go on for so long, but eventually the marriage could blow up. Everything goes wrong, and we've struck this a few times where we've just seen relationships where sons-in-law, daughters-in-law, and so on just get to the point where they blow up in their relationships because mum and dad aren't having the conversation, and they're having, the daughter's sons-in-law are having children, and they need some certainty in their lives, and they're not getting it. So this is why it's important. You need to have the conversation so everyone has certainty, confidence, and security. And in some cases, you need to identify, the reason why you need to get people together is to identify where there has been some damage. There's some, emotional healing needed. There's emotional resilience needed. And, you need to help people through things like that. You need to have conversations around money. You need to have conversations around security. And why it's important is if you don't do it, there's a huge chance that your family, when you pass on, your family, those that you love and you care for, are going to be torn apart. And, I always say my ultimate outcome for people that I deal with is that the kids all still get together at Christmas as mates, and they're not squabbling over silly things like money or who got this and who got that and so on. And communication is just such a big part of the whole reason why this is important. You need to be communicating openly with those that you love, those that you care for, and those that are the future generation. You need to be having those conversations so that your family has harmony in regard to all your plans and so on. Point 3, how should you start the conversation? So let's talk about how you start the conversation. And this is the benefits of what I say, the benefits of a peacemaker. This is what I do. You bring in a facilitator, you bring out someone from outside. You're never going to fix this from within the family. And anybody who thinks that they can just sit the family around the table and sort this all out, you're kidding yourself. Okay, and it's like, getting your regular accountant in and so on. They're all too close. You need someone that's well outside the family to come in as a independent person, as a peacemaker, and ask some magic questions. And that's what I say straight away. You need to ask the magic questions. The magic question, the first one I normally start with is, if we just wave a magic wand, I want you to tell me what it's going to look like. If we look out 3 months from now, looking back to today, tell me what it looks like. What's the family relationships going to be like? What's the certainty going to be like within the family? What sort of documents are you wanting to have in place to make sure that when something happens to you, that everyone has family harmony, the kids all still get together, and everyone has the role. They know what's coming. They know what to do. What's that going to look like for you? And assuming you live through to the ripe old age, you've got another 20, 30, 40 years to live. What's the succession plan going to look like in regard to the time that maybe, you do want to start doing something different and handing over? As I often say, when you get to the point where the bulls run faster at you than you can climb up the fence, then maybe it's time for the next generation to come through. So, what I try and do is ask some magic questions and ask some good questions to get you thinking about what you'd like it to look like. What's the ideal? What is, if you could have whatever you wanted, your family could have whatever they wanted, what would that look like? I'm also really conscious of the fact that I don't tell people what to do. I want to ask them great questions, and I want to frame questions from a place of curiosity for you. And so, you can ask questions. And so if one of the kids is starting to get a little entitled, and I might say to them, so you think you should receive 70% of the estate, and your other 3 siblings should get 10% each. Have you thought about why that's fair? So I want to ask questions of the children, specifically in regard to getting them to think about, what is fair. You don't have to be equal with kids, but you need to be fair with your family. And what I've found in life is if you allow people to come to their own conclusions and you ask the right sort of questions, people will own that. People like to own their own conclusions. They don't want to be told. But one of the most important things we do, and when you say, how do you start the conversation? We start the conversation by saying, let's draw a line in the sand. Let's just forget what's happened in the past. If there's issues, relationship issues and conversations and so on, let's draw a line in the sand and start now, and that's how we start the conversation. Let's start with a clean sheet. Okay, many times people say, okay, what can go wrong? I don't know if I've got enough time to go through all the things that can go wrong if you leave it too late. But anybody watches Yellowstone, you'll see what happens if you don't do good succession planning. That's just a great example of what can go wrong. And all the human relationships, the emotional imbalances, narcissism. You know, things that can go wrong is it brings out emotional imbalance, as I just said before. And, you know, we've had examples last year of a couple of daughters-in-law basically where, and narcissism played a very high role in both these issues, but because they didn't think they were getting what they wanted, because it had taken too long to start the conversation, and this is the key, the impossible conversation, getting everyone together, it had taken too long. And in both these cases, there were huge issues generated by spouses of the children in regard to wanting equity regardless and so on, and having an expectation or a sense of entitlement. So things that go wrong normally is when someone has a high expectation, someone has a real sense of entitlement, and they haven't been able to have a good conversation. No one's brought it up, and the longer it goes, and I keep talking about this exponential grief curve, but the longer you let it run, the worse the potential conflict is going to be. So, and one of the other things too is, you know, in regard to what can go wrong is everyone starts looking backwards instead of looking ahead. So they're all focusing on what's gone wrong, what's created issues in the relationship, and they're all blaming each other. They're looking backwards in regard to, you know, what Harry did when he, you know, used an extra tank of petrol 3 years ago or something like that, or you know, it's just all ridiculous, petty stuff. And once you start looking backwards instead of looking forwards, looking ahead, they're the sorts of things, that's where it can really come unstuck. But on the positive side, and this is what really allows me and brings joy to my heart, is what are the great outcomes? And there are plenty. So what are great outcomes, and what do they look like? So when we arrange the impossible meeting, and like we did in the tea and scones example I talked about a minute ago, great outcomes are when I help families protect their wealth, and I help them protect their legacy. You know, we've got together with them, we've put asset protection around their wealth, their prosperity, and we've helped them create a legacy which will pass on through the bloodline, through the generations. Great outcomes are when we create fairness between family members, and often you know, that can be a real issue. You might have 3 or 4 kids, and you might have one farm and no off-farm assets, and it's kind of like, well, how do I distribute this wealth between 4 different children when only one of them is going to be able to take over the farm? So how do we find ways to come up with some wealth to be passed down to the other 3 children? And it's all about creating fairness and creating opportunity. And you know, it's a really great feeling for me when we've protected wealth, we've created the legacy, we've helped created the legacy in regard to, you know, where it's going to go. But all the kids feel that it's fair, and even though it may be very uneven, we've created fairness in the family, and that just comes with communication. You know, you can't just click your fingers and say, oh, that's fair, I think that's fair. You really have to have conversations, you really have to have good communication between all the family members to make sure it's fair. Great outcomes look like this. They look like the fact that everyone in the family has a clear plan. They know exactly what the future looks like. And when we create our succession planning strategic plan for our clients, there's an absolute outcome for everyone. There's a clear action plan, and you know, it just keeps reminding me of the group of this family in New South Wales we're doing some work with. If they'd started this 15 or 20 years ago, there'd be a great plan in place now. There'd be great harmony. The grandparents would be spending time with their grandchildren, the siblings would all be getting on, and it just would be such a different outlook to what it is today. But when you do it properly, the great outcomes are the opposite of that. Everyone's getting on, everyone knows exactly what's happening, and you've got a great plan in place, and you've got family harmony. And to me, that's kind of the ultimate outcome, is that you have family harmony, and we create certainty, security, and confidence for all the members in the family. And that includes mum and dad too, because, we've got to make sure, remember, ultimately, mum and dad are the key people here. My priority is to make sure mum and dad are okay always. It's all very well on the estate planning side to start talking about what happens if mum and dad pass away and what's that going to look like and so on. But ultimately, what we're doing is making sure that mum and dad live through to 100, 110, whatever it might be, is that they're going to be okay, but everyone else knows what the opportunities and the outcomes are going to be for them, so everyone can get on with their lives. So family harmony, certainty, security, and confidence is all a very important part of a great outcome for us. And I get so much joy when I see that happening. But more importantly, this word to me is just so important, is that I want people to have pride in the outcome. I want mum and dad to be sitting there with me, and we're talking about all this. We've created certainty, confidence, and security for everyone, and mum and dad are just really proud of what they've created, what they've been able to hand down to the next generation, the way they've been able to make sure that they're going to be okay, and that they know they've done a fantastic job. And so what I'm going to say is the final thing is that ultimately the fairy tale for me, if we want to talk about great outcomes, the fairy tale for me is that a great succession plan is actually an expression of love from mum and dad through the generations. And ultimately that's what I want to help mum and dad do, is to be able to show that the love they have for their family, for their generations, for the grandchildren and all that sort of stuff is documented, is protected, and everyone gets on, everyone gets together at Christmas as mates. So there you go. Once you get through and we can create the impossible meeting, which is what we're talking about today, that's the starting point, and it's very hard to go backwards from when you have that first meeting. The first meeting is the key to creating the certainty, confidence, and security. Now, if you've got any questions, you'd like to have a chat about any of these issues that we've raised today, please leave comments below this video. Happy to get back to you. There's an opportunity, I'm sure, somewhere to book a free 30-minute chat with me if you want me to try and dig a little deeper in regard to how you create the impossible meeting in your family. There's a number of tools and strategies and exercises that I'll take you through to help get everyone together and start the conversation. And ladies and gentlemen, that's how it works, is the conversation, communication. Otherwise, you're going to end up with conflict, and that's certainly not a path you want to go down. Thanks for your time today. I hope you've got something out of this chat, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day.